I hope in these 5-10 years will really continue to keep building on our purpose and really, hopefully really help people in our projects. Whether that means we will become more big or successful, I don't really care, because I think that's not the focus.
Right.
But to really continue to discover our purpose, to focus on that, to really put our energies into that, to create a positive impact on the world.
Hey guys, this is Manisha and welcome back to yet another awesome episode of the Archgyan podcast, where you'll get some awesome gyan on architecture, tech, design, and a whole lot more. So today I'm super excited to have with us a very special guest all the way from Hong Kong, Mr. James Law, and he's the founder of James Law Cybertecture. So what is Cybertecture? Cybertecture is the design of all things for a more intelligent world through new pieces of architecture, interior spaces, artwork, technology, and strategy. He established James Law Cybertecture in 2001, and they've gone on to complete projects of various scales, some of them being OPod Housing No. 1, which is an experimental, low-cost, micro-living housing unit to ease Hong Kong's affordable housing problems, the capital in Mumbai, Technosphere, Tower of India, Cybertecture Egg, and a whole lot more. The firm specializes in architecture, interior design, master planning, consulting, technology, and industrial design. He's also launched the Cybertecture Academy that nurtures a new generation of designers from a young age, starting from school. So you get to study about architecture right from school. And talking about James, he's a graduate from Bartlett School of Architecture in London, where he completed his B.Arch. He has over 19 plus years of professional experience in the field of architecture and design. And James was recognized by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader and by the Hong Kong SAR government as a Justice of Peace for his efforts to improve the world through design. He's got a whole lot more of accolades and awards to his name, but I'm going to keep it short. So in this episode, James takes us on his journey in architecture, right from his time at Bartlett to being mentored by Peter Cook and later Itsuko Asegawa in Tokyo, how he started his own firm, James Law Cybertecture, how he landed the big projects also in India, solving Hong Kong's housing problems through design, his design philosophy and approach to design, leveraging technology, smart city planning, the architecture of purpose, which is now his new philosophy towards architecture, and a whole lot more. So for more on the episode, like episode show notes, links, and also the video version, head to archgyan.com/54. Now this is the Architecture of Purpose with James Law. Let's go. So let's kick things off. Give us a brief about, how you got into architecture. Was it something you always wanted to do as a kid, and how you've evolved as an architect in the past 20, 30 years?
I wanted to be an architect when I was a child. And I remember very clearly when I was 7 years old, I told my parents, hey, I know what I want to do. I want to be an architect. And I think they were a little bit shocked at first, but ever since I was 7 years old, I realized my life's calling, and I've been very fortunate to be able to follow my dreams. I think in life, sometimes the greatest blessings are when you know what your vocation and your life means. And I discovered that when I was very young.
All right, great, awesome. And then you went on to complete your bachelor's from the Bartlett School, right? So give us some brief about, your time at Bartlett and how the school influenced you and how you practice architecture now.
Sure. So, everything happened kind of out of serendipity. When I was studying at high school, I really already knew I wanted to be an architect, but I was also fascinated with technology. And then when I applied to universities, I was really struggling to, find out which school was right for me. And my first choice wasn't actually to go to the Bartlett. At that time, I wanted to go to Cambridge to do my architecture. And I went for my interview. Unfortunately, they didn't accept me. So my second choice was the Bartlett. And so I went to the Bartlett, not really knowing what the school was about. But I was so very lucky because the moment I arrived at the school, back in, now I'm revealing my age here, about 1989,
Wow.
the school was suddenly going through these huge changes from one which is a very conventional architecture school, becoming something really special, very, very innovative, very tech focused, very creative focused. And that was because Professor Peter Cook took over the school and really changed it
Right.
from its conventional roots into something much more like the AA. So I went there, not really knowing at the beginning what the school was about, nor knowing how it would become. But then the 5 years I was there, I think it really kind of programmed the potential DNA that was in me, which is that my passion for architecture and technology was really cemented into my philosophy of cybertecture during my time there, because I was studying in a school at the Bartlett, which was very focused on individual passions and philosophies, really championing the students to explore and to push the boundaries. And we really, came out of that education with an architecture degree that didn't tell you what architecture was, but rather an architecture degree that taught you to keep thinking about what architecture could be.
Right, right.
And so the Bartlett for me was an amazing 5 years, very, very interesting hard work, wonderful community of students, made some of my friends of life there.
Nice.
And we all were kind of infused with a passion activated within ourselves to find our own definition of architecture. And therefore, when we graduated, I think we had started to embark on a journey of our own, which led to many of our own careers being a journey of discovery and a journey of hopefully some achievement in, navigating and traveling this journey of what architecture is. So I think the Bartlett is an extraordinary school. It's a school that I think redefined what architecture education can be,
Right.
which is that it doesn't have to be totally prescriptive, but much more about, what happens within the heart and mind of the student, and he or she finding their position and definition of architecture themselves. So it
Right.
was really an incredible experience for me.
And you did party a lot as well, right?
I went really hard. I was one of the hardest. Look, the Bartlett, for those who haven't been to the Bartlett, well, the Bartlett is part of University College London, which is in London. And it has a kind of an urban campus. And the campus made out of all these buildings in the center of a district in London. But the Bartlett actually has its own building. And this building just happens to be right next to the student union.
Nice.
So the student union is where the cheap beers are, because you're a student, is where the drinking can continue. And we had plenty of great tutorials with tutors who actually suggested, hey, let's not have the tutorial in school. Let's go across the street to the union and let's have our session there. And that ends up being a really good fun. And no, we had no parties. We were so focused. We were absolutely really, no. Don't know what party is. What is party? What's that?
Nice. Awesome. All right. And post that, what is your journey like? You worked for a couple of architects, one of them being in Tokyo, and then you started this own journey of starting your own firm. So give us a brief about that transition from school to starting your own firm.
Wow, that's actually quite a long journey. It's a story that spans about 10 years. So
Right.
I think those 10 years was a journey where I went through a series of stages. The first stage was, of course, intensive learning. Although I raved about the Bartlett being a wonderful school that made us our own creative powers, but the profession needs you to know a lot of the basics. So that's really what you learn in the first few years of your apprenticeship, you can say. So working in some practices in Germany, in the UK. I had a part-time job when I was at university that really helped me. I was working in a really, really small practice that had almost gone bust. So I was the last staff left of the two partners. So I got to learn about the ins and outs of a small practice. And then the rest of the time, I learned about the discipline of working. I paid my own keep working in a library and in McDonald's. So that was my way of me paying my tuition fees and paying some money to my parents. But then after I graduated, I got some jobs in practices. And that's where I started to really learn the job of an employee in a practice. And it was a really tricky time because it was trying to balance, getting that experience in order to take my professional exams. But at the same time, in the back of your mind, you had all of these, ideas that you've collected over the years at the Bartlett and your dreams about what architecture is that you couldn't necessarily do straight away in these practices. Yeah. So a couple of 4 or 5 years of, sometimes semi-frustration, but reminder to be humble and to learn. And then I think my really amazing experience was I actually went to Japan to work for Itsuko Hasegawa. And going to Japan, having the chance to work with a superstar architect in Tokyo, living there in a completely different environment, really showed me that it was possible to run a practice, make a living, pursue your dreams, and keep that all in balance and actually achieve something. And so that was really laying the foundations to me, even though previously I was an employee. And after I worked in Tokyo, I was still an employee. This belief system that, yes, I could create a practice around myself, which may not be huge, but could certainly pursue my dreams. And then I started to work for some big practices, some American big practices in Hong Kong. I returned to Hong Kong, started to work on big projects. And then I think it was around my 7th or 8th year of practice that I decided to quit. And there's a story behind why I quit.
All right.
And the story is this. My senior in this practice, he actually reprimanded me for working too hard. He said, James, you have no future in this profession if you work like this. If you're going to spend every night working to 1 to 2 a.m. on these small projects and you're going to burn your hours like this, this is not the way to do this profession. And I got really cheesed off. I felt that, wow, how could somebody say that to a young architect that was passionate, wasn't asking for overtime pay, willing to work late, willing to try many, many options and schemes, and always never happy with what you have, just keep improving. But no, was being told that this is not the way to do something. I was really cheesed off. So I actually quit. And then that was the moment when I decided to start my own practice, because I realized that maybe, just maybe, I couldn't impose my own passions onto other people, nor can I expect the world to think in the same way as I do. And the only way that I could actually live and work the way I wanted to live and work was to have my own vehicle. So I left, and And then actually what happened was a couple of months later, the same clients that practice was serving knew I had left and actually got in touch with me directly
Right.
and asked me whether I would like to work on projects for them. And I think that was a kind of, vindication that I wasn't actually doing a bad job. I was just overly enthusiastic.
Right.
And so I decided to start. It also was accelerated by one other thing. Was the last project that I actually did as an employee was a cyber shopping center. So there was a cyber shopping center built in Hong Kong, and it got quite a lot of press. And I was interviewed in the press about, what I thought about cyber and technology, how it was going to affect architecture. And I think that also kind of gave me some traction in terms of my persona as somebody who is interested in these kinds of fields. And so when I started my practice, I decided to not call it James Law Architecture.
Right.
I decided to call it James Law Cybertecture.
Nice.
And that was really the journey. But it was a 10-year kind of span of time. I think for some people, it's quite fast already to start your own practice. For others, maybe not fast enough. But for me, I just felt that it was the right time to make that jump as an employee to becoming my own boss, you can say. But much more, I think, driven by the fact that I realized that my destiny was really going to be molded in my own hands,
right,
and not necessarily fitting into the constructs of other people. And that's just a personal thing that happened to me.
All right, awesome. So I'm a 90s kid, and I've seen the evolution.
Oh, me too, by the way. Me too. I was a kid prodigy going to architecture school when I was 8.
Yeah, so we've seen the transition of we've seen the transition of technology in games, in technology in general, right? And I'm sure you've seen the transition of technology in architecture, right, from the drafting board to now BIM and AI. So you are at a time where technology was still just picking up and is not there. But you being a futurist, how did you manage to, integrate the technology then to your practice and now slowly use the upcoming technologies? And also give us a brief about what exactly is the philosophy of Cybertecture and James Law Cybertecture.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think I was definitely very lucky to be part of that kind of early wave of technological kind of integration or technological passion in design that came, in the early 90s. And that really came at a time when, the internet and computing and all of those things started to ramp up into what it is today, which has become ubiquitous around us. But at that time, it was still kind of on the way up. And I think at that time, I think architecture was very much, stimulated by these, these powers of technology, because we were starting to feel very confined about what architecture can be. But the world was, needing new things. So for example, new ways to construct, buildings getting taller, building faster, building more economically, and then trying to coordinate the whole thing, all was having a hunger for a new kind of technology to help that happen. But then also in terms of the spaces that were being constructed, there was a lot of questions about why are we still doing the same thing again and again, after hundreds of years? Why are we not going beyond that? So yeah, at the beginning, I think there was a lot more conceptual work going on about what is probably possible one day. In my early work, we really basically just bide our chances with every project to try to integrate something. We could never rewrite the book because, it would be too expensive or too complex, or the client would not understand what we wanted to achieve. But we always wanted to do something. So for example, whether it's a building that we conceive as a giant iPod, that actually is really, in fact, a very powerful proposition that, you know, we're not living in a structure, we're living in a machine, we're living in a piece of technology, and what's around us isn't just the walls and the ceilings and the windows, but it's also the technology and the data and the multimedia and the intelligence around us that is enveloping us. In that project, we managed to put some of that technology in there, whether it's smart mirrors or projection on walls or smart locks or you know, dislocated reality. Those things we managed to put in, but it was still the early days. The internet wasn't fast enough, the bandwidth wasn't, you know, big enough, and the costs were quite high. But I think as time went by, I think we are now approaching to really what we call the end of the first chapter of Inception and into the real cybertecture. And you asked me, what is cybertecture? So here is the cybertecture definition. So actually, I believe that architecture is a technology that can ultimately alleviate the suffering of mankind. So architecture is literally the technology we build around us that could bind us together, keep us in balance with the environment, keep us safe, help us work, live, and play in a healthier, happier way, and to really pave the road to a long-term sustainable world. And so architecture is a technology, and that technology is called cybertecture.
Right.
And so now the work that I do and the practice does is a pursuit of identifying what are those challenges or problems that we need to solve, and how do we use architecture as a technology to solve it. So whether it is something as you know, ambitious as creating new cities that are not like cities in the conventional way, but more like a artificial planet, to trying to solve our affordable housing problem, where so many people can't afford even a basic little shelter, is to use the technology of concrete water pipes to try and make something that could be available and accessible to all those who don't have shelter. These are the pursuits of what cybertecture is focused on. Because, like I say, architecture is and can be the technology that ultimately alleviates the suffering of mankind. And so, you know, our practice, we are, of course, a conventional practice. We still need to do projects to exist and to survive. But within that, we often have opportunities, and we sometimes try to convince our opportunities to become those great opportunities to make a difference in the world by using a more kind of innovative, creative spark to the project that takes it beyond. And I'm very grateful for the projects we've continued to do and continue to work on. It's a journey. You know, you asked me 10 years ago, what is the definition of cybertecture? And actually, I would have actually said something slightly different. I used to say it was a symbiosis of technology and architecture together, but it's only in the last maybe 5 years that I've even come to learn in my journey the true purpose of what I'm doing. Right. And that's the new definition of cybertecture.
Awesome. Yeah, I've read in one of your articles that you transitioned from making iconic buildings to now doing more things which are more purposeful, or things which you feel would bring satisfaction to yourself, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's I'm very happy you brought this up, because I think it's another chapter in my own journey as an architect and as a person. You know, I think halfway through your career, I hope I'm only just halfway through my career now. As an architect, you've done quite a lot. but then you start to ask yourself, what actually have you done? What actually have you done? And yeah, we've done many things that I'm very proud of for myself and for my team and for my clients. And some of them are very commercial projects, and they're very successful and very iconic. They're fantastic. But, in this current state of the world in the last 5 years, we've seen how the world struggles around us, the people around us, how they struggle, whether it's the greater economy or the environment, to the politics and the social fabric getting really strained.
Yeah.
To, I think, asking ourselves, all of this energy that we put into building the world, what are we actually building? Have we really asked ourselves, do we need another kilometer tall tower? Do we need another, beautiful multi-billion-dollar museum? Whilst
Absolutely.
at the same time, around the corner, you have slums and people living on the streets and people struggling to have, food. And so, and then now with COVID-19, I think we really can see how dire we have set ourselves up, for nature to suddenly, show us just, how silly or how, how unfundamental we have really, or unwise we have been building our world with. And so, I have this key word at the moment, which I've used once today already in this chat, but I think what you are talking about is the word purpose. And I really believe that as an architect, I believe that my purpose is to create an architecture of purpose, right? It should be something that is a solution to the problems that we are facing in this world, as opposed to just another building or just another icon or just another award or just another, expression of James Law's personal creativity.
Right.
If my architecture can have a purpose, that means its value isn't just because of James Law, it's because of James Law and the team. It's created something that would influence and positively impact the world. And that, I think, is just such an incredible and beautiful and worthwhile thing to do as an architect, that we use all these skills and all of this perception and all of these ideas that we have and the craft we have to be able to craft things which are purposeful. And it sounds humble, and it should be humble, but it should be humble without the lack of ambition. It's about making things better for the world. And that's what's really driving me right now in a lot of our work.
Right.
Is, whether it's affordable housing to skyscrapers to city planning, they should have a purpose.
Yeah.
Right? I just don't see anymore how we can just blindly build things which are aesthetically beautiful or crazily complex in geometry and showy and all of those things, but without purpose. I just think that would be a tremendous waste of our time and energy and our creativity. So yeah, so you brought that up. It's been a big breakthrough in my own personal life, I think, that I have found this focus. Yeah.
All right. Great. Awesome. And talking about how the pandemic has affected us as a civilization, we now realize that because of the internet, we don't really need to go to office, or we don't really need to commute. We can have like a multifunctional house. And I'm sure like once the pandemic is done, remote working would take off and a lot of people would travel and, work from various places. So how does that impact architecture? Like what does the architecture of the future look like?
It's hard to actually say what it would specifically look like. But I think COVID-19 has shown to us that certain paradigms about what human civilization and communities are about in the future may and should be different from what it has been in the past. A couple of the key things that we really made apparent is that, the world really has a lot of people, right? We are at 6.5, approaching 7 billion people. By 2050, we will have about 10 billion people. And this sheer number of people are all going to need safe lives, right? Everybody wants to be safe and healthy. And a lot of people would expect to have prosperous lives as well. So we've seen in COVID-19 that when the economy is systemically disrupted by something as unbelievable as a pandemic like COVID-19, it shows just how you can say society is lacking in a kind of resilience. There is no resilience there built in. And that resilience is the resilience of the human spirit, but then also the resilience of the infrastructure that we've designed around ourselves. So you can say, okay, work used to be home, commuting to work. My God, we can't go to work anymore, to the office. What can we do? Okay, now the technology has come in to bind these two together. We're using it right now. We're using Zoom. Yeah. These technologies are fusing a new kind of architecture, and that architecture is taking physical space, the gap between the physical space, and then connecting it with virtual space effectively. So we are in a kind of architecture right now that is so different from pre-COVID-19, where architecture isn't just about the physical space, because the physical space has been disrupted by the epidemic. And this is not just about disease. This could be about climate change, could be about storms, could be about natural disasters. The resilience of the space around us and how we craft the infrastructure that is creating the network that is necessary for people to live together, to work together, to have an economy, to have communities, is something that I think design is going to be very much more focused on in the future. And that resilience comes from 3 tactics in design. So the first tactic is, of course, the need to build much more sustainably, building buildings that live and breathe themselves, hopefully generate their own energy, recycle their own processes, so that, we don't need to rely on, power stations so much and rely on people to deliver produce so much. A restaurant becomes resilient when it has a rooftop farm that's growing its own vegetables, compared to relying on the supermarket delivering it. Or an office building, it becomes much more resilient when it has its own wind farm and solar panels on top, and in case the grid falls off, it can still operate for a necessary period. A hospital is the same, right? A school is the same. So that's one aspect, the sustainable resilience of the architecture itself. Then the second aspect, I think that's going to be really very different, is the use of new technologies, which leads to new typologies. So what's the definition of living? Well, living is shelter, but then it's all these other aspects of work and play and communication, etc. And I think all of our architecture would be empowered using these technologies. And so how does that work? Well, for example, your so-called living room will no longer just be a living room. It will be a portal to connect to the rest of the world. It will be able to link your workspace or your colleagues together all in one go, sharing the space, sharing the community. So that's using technologies like Zooms or future forms of Zoom. Right. Another aspect is the intelligence of the space. So like the bathroom, which is a space that we all need to use, right? But the bathroom isn't just the bathroom anymore. The bathroom, the moment you walk in, becomes a health monitoring space. Nice. So, it's taking care of you. So instead of your annual checkup that you need to go to hospital, or your hospital is very far, it's very expensive to go, etc., your building, your architecture will monitor the state of your health, the state of your well-being, the state of your friendships, social media, etc., etc. So that's the other way that it will happen as well. It will be a kind of assistant to you. It will be your butler. It will be your conscience at the same time. And then the third way is ultimately, architecture is about materials. It's about, components. It's about construction. Is that architecture will change in that sense as well. It will be not built in the same way. If the pre-21st century was about construction in terms of creating landed permanent structures, which are monuments or buildings or whatever you call them, I think in the 21st century and beyond, because of the need to be more resilient, the way in which we build will be different. We'll build buildings more like cars. We'll build buildings more like aircraft, and we'll build buildings more like spacecraft. Not that they need to fly or move or whatever, but the process of construction, which is so wasteful now and so permanent and so unflexible, needs to move into a much more modular, much more kind of smart, intelligent way of building that the current way in which we create architecture doesn't really, take on. So those are the three things that really, I think, the architecture will change. But ultimately, I think the question is about people. This is a third major aspect of this conversation. It's really about people. And, it is kind of, architecture has always been a reflection of how humanity is living at that moment when the architecture is created. And I think we've seen the state of the world through COVID-19 and what we've built to show that we've been pretty naive or lacking in wisdom. I think in the future, if we are becoming more wise to the problems around us, the architecture around us would become so much more brilliant. It would be really amazing. They may become much more like part of nature.
Right.
They will raise us up on value systems that we probably have forgotten that we really need, like how to be much more fair and equitable to people. Yeah, it's all very nice to do 5-star, 6-star hotels, but 99% of the people don't feel comfortable going into them because they can't even afford the glass of water sitting in the coffee shop, right? So I think there's going to be this kind of need for a new level of design that is encouraging us to become a much more equitable, much more fair, and a much more kind of, sustainable community of humanity. And I think that would create a lot of really great architecture, whether it's great public spaces, great cities that are, available to everyone, less of this kind of polluting society that we are making now. So yeah, all of those things I hope will happen. I think they will, because we don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
We don't have a choice, yeah.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a lot of interesting facts there, and I'm sure like our listeners would even get a lot of new thesis topics as well from
Great.
that small bit. I just want to bring back the fact that, when you compare other industries like the IT industry, the construction industry is still being sort of flat when it comes to innovation and, growth in terms of technology. But now it's starting to change. And with the advent of BIM, AI, machine learning. So do you feel that in the future, architecture would be more like a product for customers where they get to choose their plans, they get to choose the architect who designs the plan, and our job as an architect would be minimal, just for maybe the conceptual side of things? So
That's
what
a very
is
good question. That's a very good question. I mean, I think for a long time, people ask me like, hey, what's the future of our role as architects in the future world? And you can already see that, the traditional role of an architect knows best. The client comes to the architect, sits down, oh, I want to make a house, I want to make a building, what do you think? And you're coming up with it. I think that will carry on, but I think on the majority that will no longer exist. I think the architecture, yes, in a certain ways will become more like a product. And we can talk about that in a moment, but let's talk about the role of the architect. I think the role of the architect will change from one which is a pure kind of architect designer to an architect strategist. So when I mean strategy, what I mean is, for example, if we are going to design the best buildings in the world, no single mind is going to be able to do that, right? So no matter how recognized you are, how famous you are, you're an iconic architect, world famous, you won't be able to do it because it's getting so complex. And it's just a very subjective thing anyway. So you become a strategist. And what is a strategist? Is you build a team, you build software, you program software, you build algorithms so that you build a kind of learning system to design. So whether you're building a company like me around me with a team, or you are programming, you know, some algorithm for design, architects will be doing that. Right. Because architects understand the issues at stake. But the processing of the design is far too complex for the architect to do anymore. For example, recently we did some research. There is now available software applications that actually take away the job of the architect. Right. How does that work? So let's say you want to make a residential tower on a certain plot in Bangalore. You submit this information into the software, and the software generates a number of options for you about how to build this building. Then you say, oh, you know, how is that an intelligent way of designing? Well, it's actually really intelligent. It's actually even more intelligent than getting James Law to design it for you, or you do it yourself. Do you know why? The same software has actually got a huge database. It's constantly trawling the internet, seeing every site in the world, around the whole world, looking for similarities of sites similar to your site in Bangalore. Same size, same orientation, same needs. And then in your brief, you're asking for a tower with 2 BHK, 3 BHK, 4 BHK, different sizes and things like this. The same software is also looking at similar projects all around the world, different BHKs, etc. And then the algorithm looks at how to fit this all together onto your site. All of those informed decisions from the millions of projects that's being done around the world, it's filtered down for your site. No architect has that amount of experience to do that. And so it would come up with schemes like, this scheme is the cheapest to build, or this scheme is the most energy efficient, or this scheme has the best views, or this scheme is the balance of 33% of each. Wow, that is what the role of the architect would be, to program that, to empower that as a strategy, but the design itself might be done much more by the intelligence or by the technology behind. Now, going back to that issue about whether architecture will become a product. Well, in some ways, architecture already is a product, right? So many people, especially middle-class people, go to a project, 3 towers, chooses an apartment. I like that. I buy that tower, that floor. It's exactly the same as the guy on the second tower, on the first tower. And it looks exactly the same. You're buying a product. You're not crafting it yourself. This isn't a personal house that you want to, you know, create. It's no longer that kind of world. The hotel room you stay in is a product. It's the same everywhere. You stay in the same brand. It's the same hotel room. Every country, every hotel, same size, same provisions, same services. It has become a product. But I think there could be potentially a different kind of interpretation of what a product is. So what I mean by that is, more or less, we feel a product is a little bit confining when we don't have much choice. But once you're given a product with choice, then it's called personalization. So when you do, let's say, a product which is a 3D printed house, the level of personalization is huge, because you can then, as you build it, you can make this a little bit bigger, make that a little bit bigger, without disrupting the product-driven aspect of the house. You can't do that with a tower that's got like the same floor plan, but you can do that with a 3D printed architecture. And I think that might happen, that you can have a personalization to it on a level that you couldn't do currently with the products. And that would make it feel more unique for you, even though it is a product. And the other aspect that I really think goes back to this modular approach is when we talk about architecture or real estate, we normally, we can't move it. I mean, it's there and it's there. And one day when you leave, you've got to sell it, or, but in the future, I think you can move it.
Right.
So, I want to move from Bangalore to Goa, but I love my house. Hey, that's no problem, because your house is designed to move anyway. You could be put on the back of a truck, or you can be lifted by helicopter or by mega drone, and then they're flown to Goa. Now that means the product stays with you, and that's different from a product that doesn't travel with you. When it doesn't travel with you, you will always in the back of your mind think this is a little bit kind of, this isn't really me. But then when you can relocate it to other places, then that would become a product architecture that is personalized by you, by location. So I think that could also happen as well.
Yeah, I guess the definition of architecture seems to keep changing from every generation to the next, right?
Definitely. And like I say, architecture for me is constantly a real-time reflection of society. It's reflecting on our nuances, our preferences, our aesthetic tastes, our focus on commodities and money and value. It's also reflecting on our interpretation about what the environment is about. So yeah, it changes because we always change. But this is also where the problem is that because we're always changing, architecture becomes outdated really quickly now. I mean, it's so hard to find a timeless piece of architecture now, because the most successful projects, the ones that are, highest, valued or lauded, tends to be now ones which are very kind of kitsch, very fashion orientated. Yeah. Ooh, another building that does this, or, but they rarely embody universal values, right, which are very much, I think, longer lasting than architecture as a reflection of right now. And so it's an interesting paradigm. It's the same for, we buy a T-shirt, or we buy, a piece of clothing. We treat it like, okay, yeah, it's in vogue now, so it's a good fashion. But once it's not in vogue, then it's bad fashion. Well, let's think about it slightly differently, because we can't afford to do this with our buildings as well. Yeah. Is that how do we make something that generation upon generation upon generation, we still see it as good design and is appropriate and is valued. And so, yeah, I think that's also the problem with architecture, is that we're just too kitsch with it at the moment. Yeah.
All right, great. I just want to briefly talk about your affiliation with India and the number of projects you've done in India. So how did you get that breakthrough to come to India and start building? And I'm sure you've had like lot of challenges constructing in India, right?
Well, the first thing I like to say is that when I started my company here in Hong Kong, I realized that for me to have a fulfilling career, I would really need to embrace the world. Right. And so from day one, I never thought that I would only be building in Hong Kong. I would really love a career where I have had the opportunity and the honor of being able to be building in many places around the world. How I came to India was interesting because, to cut a really long story short, at that time in my life, I was already in Dubai, and I was quite active in Dubai. I was spending almost half of my time in Dubai.
Right.
And then I received an email out of the blue from somebody that I didn't know, requesting me to see if I was interested to do a project in India. And I actually politely declined because I was so busy and I didn't really know India. I hadn't really visited India even before that. But this gentleman felt that I was quite appropriate for the project. And also he felt that I was quite polite in replying. So he came to visit me in Dubai and convinced me to go to India to see the site with him. I went there, and it turned out that the site at that time was India's most expensive plot of land that had ever been tendered.
Right.
So it was a prestigious project. And I think it was at that moment that I realized that, you know, India is so full of potential. And there are a lot of big dreamers and a lot of big ambition in India. This particular client of mine actually really inspired me. He also was very generous with his trust of me because he had heard about my work in Dubai, and he, at that time, I was still relatively young, and he just felt that there was a bond between the two of us. So he trusted me with the project, and then so that's how I came to India. But, you know, really, I think that whole 10 years so far that I've been in India, I think it's probably a little bit more than 10 years now, has been an incredible part of my life. I must say, an incredible part of one's life means that it is full of many things. It is full of lots of ups, but then a lot of downs as well.
Right.
I felt, you know, I learned so much. There was a lot of great kinship and friendship built up between me and my client and my clients. There was a lot of great architects I've met in India that really, my God, I was so inspired. My travels, I got to know more and more about Indian culture. And I see a lot of just incredible potential, incredible spirit of, you know, Indian culture that I think is similar to Chinese culture, but different at the same time. But then also a lot of difficult times as well. Some because of the drop in the economy, many of the projects stopped. But then also, I think it's a very diverse and complex kind of society where we also came across some builders who were not very honorable with their commitments to the projects. But, you know, like every great journey, it must have its peaks and its troughs. And I really have learned so much about myself during my time in India. I feel I fit in. I even play cricket now.
Nice.
So, so I play cricket. You know, I eat masala dosa whenever I can for breakfast. I love drinking masala chai. I love, you know, spending time, you know, traveling around India and seeing the other aspects of India. I feel that I've had an incredible honor bestowed on me, in the sense that as a young Chinese architect, I've been vested with the trust and friendship of so many people in India that has given me projects to do. And for that, I'm always eternally grateful. And I think, you know, it's something that, you know, I think in my career and life, I just think, wow, that's amazing that, you know, I've gone to a place that's been so generous to me. And but ultimately, I feel that both Chinese and Indians are the same in that we love our families, we work hard, we've gone through difficult times, we need to build better, we need to plan better for the future. And I just feel that I have had the luck to be able to bridge the two as an architect, and wow, it's just been an amazing journey for me. Yeah.
Awesome, James. So you've done like a lot of amazing projects over the years. The Technosphere, which is like amazing, like just to like imagine condensing everything to a globe, and also like a couple of other projects like the Capital in Mumbai, the OPods. So I just want to hear your opinion on the projects which don't get built, like how taxing it is for you when you see your projects which you devoted so much of time and effort not getting realized, and how do you overcome that? I'm sure like a lot of architecture firms face the same problem, right?
Yeah, of course, it can be quite disappointing. You put your heart and soul into these projects, the whole team, big ambitions. But I think over the years, I have matured much more, both accepting these things sometimes work out and sometimes they don't, into a perception that, everything in life, especially architectural projects, are a result from circumstances, right? You need to have all of the circumstances kind of, very, very fortunately aligned for things to really happen and go through and get created. That could be the economy, that could be politics, that could be about people. It's very, very, it's a very, very narrow probability, actually, especially when you're doing something ambitious or something that is game changing, because there are always going to be doubters and there's always going to be risks that people have to take in order to do something different as well. So that further adds to the probability of it not going ahead. When I was younger, I used to get quite frustrated. I used to think like, oh my God, another one that didn't get built. If it got built, then it would change the world, and I didn't manage to quite change the world. And
Right.
that's kind of frustrating at that time. But now I want to share with you that I've come to accept it in a much more, I think, healthy way. I really believe what's meant to be will be. The hiccups or the suspensions or the things that didn't get built are a lesson in life. That if they were all got built, then you've had a seemingly an overly perfect career. that would be like, my God, that would be something that's unbelievable. But also what you take away from them, I think if you use it properly, it makes you into a stronger, more mature and wise architect, in that you shouldn't have those expectations. You shouldn't have the expectations of fame, wealth. You shouldn't have expectations of ego. You should try not to have the expectation of success. Architecture is a journey, and it's one that has to be traveled realistically. And your commitment shouldn't be founded on the tangible successes that you've achieved, but by the underlying belief and passion in your work. And so I think these last 10 years, where so many projects didn't get built, were conceived and designed, but didn't get built, were great lessons for me and my team to realize that what really drives us needs to be on the level beyond the tangible realization of the projects. They have to be something greater than that. And then and then, you leave it to God that the right ones get built and the right ones come at the right time in order to really create that positive impact or purpose that we want to create. So yeah, it is hard at first, and it's never totally easy, but there's a phrase that is recently been quite commonly used. It's a quote from Bruce Lee,
Right.
The Kung Fu.
Yeah, of
Kung
course.
Fu, right? And one of the ways that he shared his philosophy was this phrase, be like water.
Yeah.
Be like water. So as long as you can keep flowing like water, even though sometimes you get diverted by an obstacle, you don't get stopped by it. You keep flowing. Just keep flowing through. Just keep flowing. Keep your energy, keep flowing. Don't let these things break you. Don't let these things destroy you. And eventually, you will flow to where you're meant to flow. And that's kind of how I see it as well.
All right. Brilliant. All right, James. And one of the last questions to you would be, what's your take on architectural education? Like, do we really need to study for 4 or 5 years to become an architect, considering the fact that the world now requires rapid solutions, get to the task really fast, come up with solutions really fast. But our school, they generally talk about the subjective side of things, like building your creativity. But do you think that could probably be condensed to maybe 2, 3 years and also become a good architect, even if you don't study architecture?
It's a difficult one to answer. I think architectural education needs to be a balance between creativity and the practical, because ideas don't build buildings.
Yeah.
Real practical hands and knowledge build buildings. So you need both. If it's only the hands building the building, then the building is kind of, lacking in ideas. So I think the education needs to have both. But then I also think that the education is long for a reason, but it doesn't necessarily have to be so long. I think it's long because the depth of the thinking and allowing an architect to really come to understand architecture in himself needs time. It's not a 1 + 1 = 2. There's a lot of depth in it, so that takes time. But that time can also be done during your career. It's not like, after 5 years at architecture school, I know how to be an architect. No, I think that's just the start of your education. So is it 5 years? Is it 4 years? Is it 3 years? Is it 2 years? Maybe it can be shorter, but it cannot be too short. But one thing that I do believe in is that architecture education should start earlier. I don't really necessarily think it has to be only a tertiary education curriculum. I really believe that some of the most creative, passionate sparks can happen when you're young. I was lucky to, by chance, find it when I was very young. But why can't architecture be taught at primary school? Why can't architecture be taught at secondary school? And if you do that, then you might have identified or let those students find, wow, I'm really passionate about this. So, and once they activate that passion, they don't need 5 years in architecture school. By the time they graduate secondary school, they already learned all of their BIM and they know their architecture history, and I love design, I'm building things, I'm experimenting. Wow, you have a generation of architects which are so much ahead of the game that, you don't need 5 years of architectural education to train them to be architects. So I think, rather than making it shorter, I think making it earlier can maybe really unleash a whole new generation of amazingly talented young architects.
And that's what your company is doing, right? Cybertecture Academy.
Yeah. So I believe that. I believe it's one of the formulas of success in terms of education that we try to allow students to earlier in their life to try something that they won't be able to try at the tertiary education. And then you find that, my God, they are so talented and so passionate that, they basically accelerated and overtaken, the others. And that's great. That's really great. That's what we're doing. Yeah. We believe in that.
Brilliant. And how much do you feel online education could change architecture? Because we have a lot of online courses, we have a lot of workshops, academies. So how much of an influence does online education have on architecture?
Yeah, you know what? I think it does. I think it should. I think, for example, normally at architecture school, when we go to school, we are really, I wouldn't say confined, but we are within the construct of that school. So you're being taught by the teachers of that school. But online, there's a probability or possibility that you could have a much more diverse set of teachers, diverse set of circumstances arise. You could be taught by somebody from Denmark. You can be taught by somebody from Japan, and you could talk to other architects from South America. Well, that's great, right? I mean, surely a wider kind of perspective on the education through the internet is always a great thing. And like it or not, I think this word online and offline will disappear in the future. It's just going to be, we're all going to be connected. And I didn't need to fly to India to have this interview with you, nor did you have to fly to Hong Kong. And we can chat like this as if we are sitting next to each other. And so I think it should be part of the education as much as it can to, expand and empower beyond the confines of the education that you're already having. I think it's a no-brainer. I think, that's just going to be great for architects. Yeah.
Brilliant. Awesome. James, where do you see yourself maybe 10 years from now? What is James Law Cybertecture going to be looking like in the coming few years?
That's a very good question. I tell you the tangible answers first. We're running the practice and we're doing projects, and we try to our best with all of the opportunities that we get with the projects. We run the academy, so we will continue to do that, hopefully grow that and mature that into something that is going to be really, really great to, inspire a new generation of young architects. I recently started a startup to build and design, shelter to basically, hopefully, have grand missions to eradicate homelessness with a new generation of architectures like the OPod and the BoxPod.
Great.
And we want to, share that with the rest of the world. So that's all happening. These are the tangible things happening. I think the next 5 to 10 years is going to be a very, very amazing time. And when I say amazing, it's a mix of, great challenges as well as great successes and great failures. I think we're living in this kind of, a kind of Renaissance period, actually, where, hard work and great ideas can change the world, because we are facing a lot of problems. And I hope that, myself and my team and the people we work with, our partners, our projects, I hope in these 5, 10 years will really continue to keep building on our purpose, and really, hopefully really help people in our projects. Whether that means we will become more big or successful, I don't really care, because I think that's not the focus.
Right.
But to really continue to discover our purpose, to focus on that, to really put our energies into that, to create a positive impact on the world. That's all I can hope for in the next, 5, 10 years. And I'll be very grateful for that already. So, Yeah.
All right. Brilliant. Thanks a lot, James. I think we had a fantastic session. We just
Thank
have
you.
a quick fire round. I'll just ask you a couple of brief questions and you
Sure.
just probably give brief answers. All right. Who has been your mentors as an architect, in your career as an architect?
I can list them for you. So my professor, Peter Cook, inspires me by the way he thinks. My mentor from Japan, Itsuko Hasegawa, who generously took me under her wing and let me see a whole new world. And then the people around me in my practice, they really inspire me every day to work as a team. But ultimately, I think my parents for, letting their son pursue their dreams, even though they didn't have a lot of resources, and have allowed me to become an architect. So they are the ones who inspire me.
All right. Awesome. Which city would you consider your favorite?
Hong Kong,
All
because
right.
it's my home. But then I love my other cities that I've spent a lot of time in: Dubai, Mumbai, London have always been close to my heart. Yeah, these have been my major favorite cities.
All right. What does a daily routine in James Law's life look like? Maybe pre-COVID.
Okay, so wake up early in the morning. I drive my wife to work, and then by 8 a.m. I'm at the golf driving range. I'm
All
practicing
right.
my golf.
Nice.
Aside from my passion for architecture, I am aiming fantasy to become a scratch golfer. And
Nice.
so I practice 2 hours of golf every morning. Then I go to the gym, and then I'm back at work by about 10 o'clock. And then work through the day, lots of meetings, recently a lot of Zooms. And then try to finish work at a healthy time around 6:30. And then pick up my wife, and then we have dinner, and then and then just relax, and then that's my very simple life. Yeah.
All right. Great. Awesome. And what do you consume for entertainment? Do you have like favorite movies or series or Netflix that you watch?
Ever since I was young, a little boy, I'm a big movie fan. Um, I watch everything. I love science fiction, of course. Big Star Wars fan. I watched it about 120 times. Big Marvel fan. Big classics fan. A lot. My father loved World War II films. I watched
Nice.
those. Last 5-10 years, love Indian movies.
Nice.
Three Idiots, Dango. All of that. I met the producer and director of Dango, so
Oh,
that was
nice.
amazing. And then Netflix is always on in the house, always on here in the office as well.
All right.
No, movies are great thing. Just makes you relax, makes you see another world, and shows you a lot of possibilities. Yeah.
All right. Do you have any books that you would recommend, or which ones would you consider your favorite books as well?
Yeah. There's a lot of books which I read which are not architecture related.
Right.
Um, but if I recommend an architecture related one first, is uh, really close to my heart, because that was the reason why I became an architect. I didn't read the book, I saw the movie first, which was The Fountainhead
Right.
by Ayn Rand. So I watched the movie when I was a child, and that inspired me to become an architect. But since then, of course, I read the book. You have to take it with a bit of pinch of salt. It's a kind of heroic story, but it's of course very inspiring about keeping a vision and
Yeah.
sticking to it. That's the book. But I read a lot of other things. I recently, read a lot of autobiographies. The autobiography of Barack Obama. Read the Nelson Mandela. Um, you know, a lot of interesting innovation books about how the world is changing. And yeah, just I love reading. I just don't get so much time to read. But yeah, those are the kind of books I like.
All right.
And also Harry Potter.
Awesome. Where do you get your inspiration from? Is it from through life's experience, or is it uh, more of the books you read, or the movies you watch, or the people you meet?
Definitely life experiences. The more I feel that I'm letting go and living life and, trying to be open and perceptive of what's happening around me, the more inspiration I get. And the more relevant the ideas are when you do that. So yeah, Peter Cook once kind of told me that his analogy of how inspiration comes for somebody is that, we're all kind of unique filters. We're all different personalities, different souls, and we are actually a filter of our life's experiences. And what we filter, the filtrate inside our filter, becomes the material for our creativity. So the more we expose our filter to, the world, relationships, happenings, events, knowledge, stimulation, I think the more kind of diverse collection of filtrate that we get into our lives, and that's kind of somehow germinates into ideas. So yeah, I get it definitely from my experiences of life. Yeah.
All right, brilliant. And my last question to you is, what advice would you give to young architecture students and graduates of architecture?
Wow. I think really my advice is to live your life to the full. Find happiness, be balanced, be safe, be patient to mature and understand yourself. Don't let the ego, especially the ego of architecture or the ego of being an architect, overtake you. Remember, it's a blessed profession, but it's also a very, I think it's also a very dangerous profession, because it could corrupt your mind, to become obsessive. So it's important to live a balanced life, a healthy life, to be grateful for, every small project, every opportunity you get. Do your best, and then maybe the culmination of all of that is you'll get the deserved career that you deserve, and you get it in a way where you haven't stupidly sacrificed yourself, but at the same time you have contributed the best of yourself. So that's my advice.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, James. I think we had a fantastic session, lots to
Yeah, it's
learn.
great.
And
Thank you so much for inviting me. And your interviews are great. I think I think your audience is really, can get a lot out of all of these sharings, right? So it's a
absolutely.
really great platform.
Yeah, we need to leverage technology as much as we can, right? So
absolutely, yeah, and you're doing it really well.
All right, thanks, James, and I hope to have you in the future as well. We could dwell deep on specific topics as well.
Of course, sure, most welcome. Thank you, and good luck with everything, and stay in touch.
All right, great.